How you doing? We're having some technical difficulties. Part of living in Corn, Oklahoma. For some reason, we didn't want to connect on the desktop. So my lovely bride is holding the phone. I appreciate you joining us. And if you've got requests, I'm surprised how many people had requests. But if you had requests, I'm happy to share a story that you've heard, or maybe one that you haven't heard in a while. But we're gonna go through some of the stories that I tell in my workshops and in keynotes, and I'm also going to tell some of the stories I don't tell. But I'm not going to try to make this too long. But once it starts to fade and fizzle, we'll shut it off. And I was on my got a text from a guy, good friend of mine named Peter Wall, and he said, tell the story about the time in high school when you stuffed an 80-pound Mennonite boy into a high school locker. And I'm probably not going to tell that story, but in my defense, Mr. Wall, I did not know that locker was full of shelves and books. So I think you would have gone in a lot easier had I known those shelves and books were not in there. But he also wanted me to share how did it feel then, and compared to how does it feel now. And honestly, it was pretty funny then, and it's hilarious now that you're a grown man with a receding hairline. But had a lot of fun with that. But no, some of the things I did in high school I regret, but that is definitely not one of them. But let's get started. I had a few requests. One of some of the stories I'm going to share, you might laugh, and some of them might pull at your heartstrings a little bit. But one of the things that I do when I'm on the road is I always talk about Corn America. And most of you know I live in Corn, Oklahoma. If you didn't know that, that's where I live. Corn, Oklahoma is a little town of 503 people. And for, let's see, the first 15 years my wife and I were married, we lived in Oklahoma City. And if you're outside of Oklahoma, that's kind of our big city here in Oklahoma. But 5 years ago, we moved to a little town out in western Oklahoma called Corn, Oklahoma. And people ask me all the time, everywhere I go, they ask me, why in the world do you live in Corn, Oklahoma? And sometimes I ask myself that exact same question. But there's certain things that a small town can give you that a big city can't. Most of you know we've got kids. Cruz is now 12 and Elle is 14, just turned 14. So pray for us. But there's certain things a small town can give you in regards to raising kids that a big city can't. And my kids can ride their bikes all around town. I don't have to worry about them. Because I know if and when they do something stupid, I'm going to hear about it because everybody in town's got my cell phone number. But that's called accountability. And right now, as I'm looking at this world, I see a generation of individuals that never been held accountable before in their life. And it's changing this world. One of the things my wife and I really wanted is we wanted to teach our kids accountability. And it's easier for us to do that here in Corn America. Another thing I like about Corn, Oklahoma is grew up on a farm out here. Trina grew up right here, almost in town, and I grew up in a thriving metropolis of Alfalfa, Oklahoma. If you haven't been there, it used to be about 60 people. It's probably not that big anymore, but you don't have to grow up on a farm to know how to work, but you can't grow up on a farm and not know how to work. My dad, he worked my brother and I like a rented mule. I mean, he just worked us. We didn't have a choice. And I want my kids to know that after school and on the weekends, there's something to do. And I'm not great at this. I'm not great at working my kids like I should be. But I want them to learn a work ethic. And we know it's a heck of a lot easier for us to teach our kids a work ethic in Corn, Oklahoma than it was when we lived in Oklahoma City. Another thing I like about Corn, Oklahoma, most of the people down here, not all of them, but most of them, they say what they mean what they say. They tell you something, you can take it to the bank. They believe their handshake's worth more than their signature. And man, most of us grew up in a time when that was the case. But what I see in companies all over the country right now is we've lost sight of that. We believe that if it's legal, It must be right. And when we live in a world where legal has taken the place of right, man, I think we're lost. But down here in Corn, Oklahoma, we feel a little bit isolated from that. And one of the nice things about Corn, Oklahoma, a lot of you guys know Cruz. Well, when we moved down here, he was 7 years old. Now, Cruz is, you'd like him. If you don't know him, you'd like him. This guy is just a bottle of joy. But his favorite thing in the world is breakfast. Now, not his favorite meal, his favorite thing in the world. You give him an option between Christmas and breakfast, he chooses breakfast. And he's also an early riser. He thinks anything after about 5:30 in the morning is a complete waste of time. When he was little, and that's starting to change now that he's becoming a man, but when he was little especially, he's always like, Daddy, why does anybody sleep past 5:30? I mean, there's so much fun stuff to do. He wants to get up and do it. And I remember it was the first weekend we were down here in Corn, and I was coming home from doing some workshops. I was up in Oakland, and I had a layover in Las Vegas. I fly Southwest Airlines a lot, and while I was in Vegas, I called the kids and trained to tell them good night. And Cruz gets on the phone, 7 years old. He said, Daddy, we going to have breakfast in the morning. I said, well, sure, buddy, we'll have breakfast. He said, all right, I'll get you at 5:30. I said, don't you dare get me up at 5:30. I said, buddy, my flight don't land till midnight. It's going to take me 2 hours to get home. I'm going to roll in bed at 2 a.m. I'm on West Coast time. I'm going to the east. I said, please do not get me up at 5:30. He said, but Daddy, the cafe opens at 6. I said, it don't matter when the cafe opens. And I said, Cruz, we don't have to get there when they open. We just have to get there before they close. And he said, no, but Daddy, they open at 6. We got to get there to get some breakfast. And, have you ever tried to argue with a 7-year-old? And finally I said, Cruz, we are not getting up at 5:30. And he got real quiet on the other end of the phone. And he said, well, Daddy, I just go by myself. And I said, what? He said, I just go by myself. I said, you're going to go by yourself? He said, I'll go by myself. And I said, that's a pretty good idea. Now, I don't know if that was a stroke of genius or stroke of insanity, but he handed the phone to Mama and he went off to bed. Mama immediately gets on the phone, and Trina does, and she said, what did you just tell our little boy he could do? And I said, sweetheart, I said, he probably won't even get up. I said, I don't think we need to worry about it. And she said, Nick, he cannot be going down to the cafe by himself at 5:30 in the morning. This is crazy. And I said, sweetheart, I said, it's Corn, Oklahoma. I don't think it's going to matter. I don't think he's going to do it. Have you ever tried to argue with your spouse? Doesn't go much better. And I don't know, my flight was bored and I hung up the phone, got on an airplane. I landed at midnight, come home about 2 a.m. and doesn't seem like I could close my eyes. And I hear his alarm going off down the hall at 5:30 in the morning. And I look down the hall and I start seeing the light shining underneath his door. My wife has got the boniest elbow on the planet, and she is working over my short ribs, and she said, you need to get up and stop him. Of course, I'm wanting to sleep, and I said, oh, sweetheart, he probably won't get outside the front door. I said, I think we're going to be all right. Well, she persisted, and I just ignored her. But finally, and I told her, I said, 5:45 is going to be the moment of truth. Because at 5:45, Cruz is going to open that front door, and when he looks outside, what's he going to see? I mean, it's going to be pitch black. It's so early, the moon's not out. And sure enough, at 5:45, you can hear this little 7-year-old boy open that front door real slow, and you can hear him hesitate. Of course, Trina and I are wide awake in bed. He took about a 3-second pause, and then he was gone. He was gone. Now Trina's really starting to freak out. And she says, you need to get down there and stop him. I said, Susan owns a cafe. If there's a problem, she will call us. And Susan and Matt own the cafe here in Corn. And later that morning, I went down to the cafe and I asked Susan. I said, Susan, this morning, 6 o'clock, what happened? She said, Nick, I almost called you. I said, yeah, I figured you did. Now, Corn Cafe is like any small town cafe in the country. In the middle of the cafe is about 4 tables all pushed together. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, I mean, who do you think's sitting around those 4 or 5 tables? Well, it's a bunch of old guys, right? And same thing here. It's the old guys. They're sitting around the table. They're drinking coffee, and they're telling lies. I mean, it's the same lies they told last week, but this week they're bigger. And She said this morning Cruz walked in like he owned the place and pulled up a chair right there with him. She said it was the first time every one of those old guys shut up at the same time. And then my little 7-year-old boy looked up at Susan. He ordered a short stack of pancakes, some scrambled eggs, some bacon, and a cup of coffee. And at 7 years old, he started drinking coffee at the cafe. And I'll tell you, he doesn't get down there every day the cafe is open. But he's down there a lot. We would have been down there this morning, except the cafe is closed. Well, they do delivery, and you can pick up. So if you're in town, go ahead and place an order. But that is one of the stories that I start out almost every conference that I do. And my hope is that gives some insight into where I live and what I do and why we do it. But let me see. I had a list of other stories that people had requested. I don't tell this story in a workshop, but I'll tell you. I went to school at College of the Ozarks in Branson, Missouri, and the great thing about College of the Ozarks is it's right off of Table Rock Lake. And I met a good buddy of mine. He became a good buddy of mine. His name was Scott Smith. He only became a good buddy of mine because he had a boat. And that's how I kind of decided who I would befriend. And as soon as I found out Scott had a boat, I said, man, this is a guy that I need to get a hold of. And so I started talking to Scott about bow fishing. And I was doing a lot of bow fishing at that time. And Scott had a boat, and Table Rock Lake is a great bow fishing lake. And you really want to bow fish. And when we would bow fish, and that's where you shoot a fish with a bow and arrow, it's super hillbilly. But a lot of fun. Most fun you can have with your clothes on. And when you shoot a fish with a bow and arrow, you're really going... Trina's wanting to leave right now. She's the one holding the phone, and she's like, oh, you said this was going to be family friendly, and you're starting to cross the line. But you really are going to go out late spring, early summer, because that's when the carp and the gar are starting to spawn. And right outside of Branson, I mean, that's where we are. And this one day, it was late May. School's almost out. It was probably finals week. We never went to a single final, I don't think. In college, we just fished, and we'd gotten into some gar and some carp. And the problem was when you shoot a fish, the new arrows have a slide on them, so the line, the string that's tied to the arrow, doesn't go through the fish. But the old arrows, and I'm pretty old, you can tell by my gray hair, when we would shoot a fish, the line, we'd tie it through the broadhead, through a hole in the shaft of the arrow, and every time that line would go through the fish, it would kind of cut it. Well, we'd get excited, we'd just start shooting fish, and pretty soon it would cut our line, and we'd lose an arrow. And it'd come out of a fish or whatnot, and we could see the arrows on the bottom of the lake. And it's 10, 12 feet deep. And I remember looking at this white arrow down there. Now an arrow was $20. Now, when I was in college, I was so broke, I couldn't afford to pay attention. And so that $20 was all the money in the world to me. And I told Scott, I said, I got to get that arrow. And we were deep in a cove, and no one was around, and I didn't want to walk around in wet clothes all day. So it's not that bad. So I ended up stripping down into my whitey tighties, and I went in diving for this arrow. Now, finally I dove down, I got the arrow, and I came back, and the fish are just everywhere, and so I didn't bother getting redressed. I just picked up my bow, and I just started shooting fish again. What I didn't realize was there is a attraction in Branson called the Showboat Branson Bell. Now the Showboat Branson Bell, I think they're still there. It's the ducks that went away. Right. But thanks for bringing that up, Trina. Way to go. Bring up the ducks. We were going to avoid that. But no, the ducks are out on the lake too. But the Showboat Branson Bell, I don't know what they hold with 500 people. It's a dinner cruise. And we weren't paying any attention. We were down this cove, but here comes the Branson Bell. 30 yards away. I'm standing there in my whitey tighties, wet. It's cold. It was a worst case scenario. So finally get past that. We didn't have digital cameras back then. We had those little disposable cameras. You used to have, for some of you young guys, you used to have to take film to Walmart or Kmart, get it developed, or a photo place. And so we had 3 or 4 cameras. We wanted to see all these pictures of our fish. And so I took the cameras to Kmart, get the film developed. And, you know, you wait 2 weeks and come back and I pick it up. Well, there's a gal working at the camera shop that I went to college with. And when she hands me the photo, she's like, "Hey, Nick, how you doing?" And I'm like, "What's your problem? You know, what's that smirk on your face?" Well, I started going through these photos, and dadgummit if Scott wasn't taking pictures of me while I was bobbing for this arrow. And I've never have forgiven him for that. But I do not share that story in my workshops. One that I do share is about my daughter Elle. Now she, if you know her, she's the sweetest little girl you've ever met, and she came out of the womb 23 years old. She's been more mature than I am her whole life, and when we moved to Corn, she desperately wanted to have a lemonade stand. That's just kind of what she wanted to do, and she's got the entrepreneurial spirit in our family. Her and I do, but she's always looking for that angle, and she wanted to have a lemonade stand. So Mama and I got together, and when we helped her do this. You know, she was 9, and so we got some poster board, and we helped her make a sign. We got some table, we got some lemonade, and we got some chocolate chip cookies, and we started. We set her up by the road, and set her up for business. And it was lemonade and chocolate chip cookies a quarter apiece. Well, this was the first time she had done this, and so I was kind of hanging out in the yard. And I was kind of watching her and just seeing what was going on. I didn't know. We kind of knew Corn, but there might be some weirdos here we didn't know. And all these people started showing up at the lemonade stand, and they'd buy a glass of lemonade and a cookie. And about halfway through that first day, I noticed that every time she had a customer, she would hand them a piece of paper. And I thought, yeah, this girl's sharp, but now she's handing out receipts. And we kind of built this cash business. I was kind of wanting to be under the radar. You know, now she's going to get me in trouble with the tax commission. And so, but I didn't want to crush her dreams, so I just kind of let it go. And later that day, toward evening, I had a pocket full of change. I wanted to go support my daughter and her business. And so I went over there to buy a chocolate chip cookie and a glass of lemonade. And when I did, she handed me this piece of paper. And I said, "Oh, sweetheart," I said, I don't need that piece of paper. I don't need a receipt. And she said, "Oh, Daddy, this isn't a receipt." I said, "Well, what is this?" She said, "Oh, Daddy, this is an encouragement card." She said, "Everybody comes to my lemonade stand because they want a glass of lemonade or they want a cookie. But what they really need is encouraged." And what she had done is she had handwritten these encouragements on these 3x5 note cards, and her grandmother had given her a 365-day, day of the year calendar with a different encouragement on it each day, and she had gone through those and picked out her favorite ones and wrote them on those cards. And what was interesting about that particular day is I was struggling with something, and right now we're all struggling a little bit. I don't know about your world. In my world, I mean, my calendar has been devastated. Every program just about has been, is just gone. My year's wide open. And I've canceled more business in the last 2 weeks than I have in the last 10 years combined. And there's a lot of people out there hurting right now, but that particular day I was struggling with something. And when she handed me that encouragement card, the message she had handwritten on it was, "Let your faith be bigger than your fears." Man, it just almost dropped me to my knees. Throughout the summer, everybody in town started lining up, and I thought they were wanting the cookie and lemonade, but they really wanted the encouragement cards. Then we started getting pictures. Got pictures from people that had an encouragement card in their sun visor or stuck on their microwave. We had Chris Lowen in town. She sent me a picture. She probably had 25 of them on her refrigerator. She'd kept them all. We'd go to church and we'd see somebody with an encouragement card stuck in their Bible, and we just started realizing what an impact this little 9-year-old girl was having. And that had gone on for maybe a year, and we were having dinner one night, and the kids are always asking me, where are you going? Who are you talking to? And most of the stuff I do is in the construction industry, but I'd gotten an invitation to be the opening keynote speaker at the it's ADMC, Academy of Dental Management Consultants, I believe. Great people over there, and they had asked me to go to Atlanta, be their opening keynote speaker, and I told the kids and Trina that night, I said, well, I've got an interesting deal in about a month, and it's a little different deal. And Elle, she said, well, what do they do? What's a dental consultant do? And I said, well, they do what Daddy does. They write books, they do speeches, they encourage their clients, you know, they work with companies. And she said, well, they need encouraged too, don't they? I said, yes, they do. Yes, they do. And came home from my next trip that next week, and she handed me 400 encouragement cards. And she said, Daddy, I want you to make sure everybody in that room gets one of these encouragement cards. And so I did. I stuck them in my suitcase, and I headed to Atlanta, and I kind of worked that story about the lemonade stand in my keynote. And at the end, I said, my little 9-year-old, she's probably 10 at the time, my 10-year-old daughter wants everybody in here to have a handwritten encouragement card. And so after the program, I just randomly handed them out. There was all these random messages. And I had to get on an airplane to go to another program, and as I was getting on the elevator, I had a young lady stop me, and she was about 50, and she said, Nick, I got to get a hold of you before you leave. And I said, what's going on? And she had tears just rolling down her cheeks. And she said, Nick, I didn't want to be here today. She said, I live in Seattle. She said, I'd already bought my plane ticket, but I had a doctor's appointment yesterday, and I got some news. And I didn't want to get on that plane, but I'd already bought my ticket, and I couldn't get a refund, and so I just decided to come. And she said, and then I got in late, and I looked at the agenda, and I saw some construction guy is talking to a bunch of us dental consultants, and I didn't want to listen to you this morning. But I woke up, and I couldn't go back to sleep, and so I figured I might as well come in. And so she said, I sat in the back where I wouldn't be bothered, and then you came around and handed me these handwritten encouragement cards. And she said, the one I got. And she held up her hand with this encouragement card, and when she held up her hand, it was shaking so bad I just wrapped my hand around hers. She said, yesterday I was diagnosed with cancer, and today your daughter gives me this card, and on that card Elle had written, God's not finished with you yet. And she was crying, I was crying, we all were crying. I didn't expect this to happen. If I wanted you to watch me cry, we would watch Die Hard together, because there is nothing that will bring me to tears more than watching that flame trail into that airplane and watch it blow up there at the end. I mean, that is just a beautiful moment, as you well know. But I just thought, what an impact a simple word of encouragement can have. Later I was writing a book. The last book I wrote is called Know This, Do That. It's for anybody starting a career. It's what someone needs to know and what someone needs to do to build a successful career. And Elle asked me, she said, who's that book for? And I said, well, it's for anybody starting out in a career. You know, anybody trying to figure out what building a career is all about. And she said, you know, Daddy, they need encouraged too. I said, yes, they do. And she committed to putting a handwritten encouragement card in every copy of that book that we sold. And what's amazing is she's written over 15,000 encouragement cards. People all across the U.S. and Canada have received these books with those encouragement cards in them. It's absolutely phenomenal, the impact that she's having. And the lesson that I take from that is if a 9-year-old girl at the time, I mean, she's 14 now, but if a 9-year-old girl, or heck, a 14-year-old girl, can have that level of impact, that level of influence, without authority, without a title, without permission, if she can have that level of influence, with somebody that she's never met. You know, what's our excuse? What's our excuse? This is a story that I've never shared in a workshop, but it just touches me, and so I want to share it with you. But years ago, we were living in Oklahoma City, Edmond actually, and didn't have an office, so I would just go crash whatever coffee shop I could find. And on this particular day, I went to a McDonald's. The McDonald's, I believe, is right there on Main, about 150th if you're familiar with Oklahoma City. No, it'd be 164th, but anyway, it don't matter. So I'm sitting in the back, and I'm having a cup of coffee, working on my laptop, and I noticed in the corner there's probably 10 or 12 old guys sitting around a table drinking coffee, just like you would see anywhere. And these guys, I sat there and I studied them for a while, and I just noticed, man, these guys, you could tell they'd been friends for a lifetime. They had spent 20, 30, 50 years together. You could just tell there was just this familiarity about how they communicated with each other, and this camaraderie, and I could see one of the old men was not doing well. These guys were probably 75 to 90 years old, and one of the men in the group, he wasn't doing well, and you could see everybody in the group was concerned about him. Watching those old men, it made me feel good about getting old someday. And I like to watch people, and I kind of scanned the restaurant, and I looked and I saw a sweet little old lady about the same age as those old men. She was sitting all by herself, and I just broke my heart. And I noticed that she would watch those men. And I could just imagine the memories going through her mind. I imagine she had lost her husband, and now she's alone, and seeing those old men is bringing back all these memories. And I mean, it just broke my heart to watch her. And every once in a while, you just see her wipe a tear away from her cheek. Just, it touched me. And after about another 15 minutes, the old guys, they'd finished their last cup of coffee, and they started getting up to say their goodbyes. And when they started getting up, this sweet young lady of about 80 years old, I'm guessing, she got up and started walking toward them. And that's when I realized she wasn't alone. But it was that frail old man that wasn't doing very well at all. This was his wife. And she had brought him. And every one of those guys gave her a hug and thanked her for bringing their buddy to coffee. And I watched them. I watched them help him to the car. He could barely walk, and she got in and drove away. And I just thought about what does their typical day look like? It's got to be filled with doctor's appointments and tough conversations. But for 1 hour every week, I bet every week, she gets him up, gets him dressed, puts him in a car, takes him to McDonald's so he can have a cup of coffee with his buddies and feel like one of the guys. And I just thought, man, that's how I want to be loved someday. That's how I want to love. You know, I just think that level of compassion, of dedication, that is just phenomenal. Another story I often tell in my workshops is about Cruz. Cruz is a really good target for stories because he does so much crazy stuff. And how are we doing on time? How long has this been?
30 minutes.
30 minutes. It's getting long. I'll shut up here just a minute. And I got a bunch more stories, so we may have to do this again unless you guys just say this was horrible. Then we probably won't. But Cruz, He's creative. He's always looking for the shortcut. That's probably putting it nicely. Elle's got a work ethic. She's got a work ethic that won't stop. And Cruz is always looking for the angle. And I'm always looking for a way to motivate that young man. And as his father, I feel like it's my job to drive in him a work ethic. And every once in a while, an opportunity pops up where it's easier for me to do that. And what had happened one day, he showed up. Now, when Cruz makes a decision, he has to announce it. It's got to be a production. He must get that from his mother. But he showed up one day, and he walked through the front door home from school, and he said, "Dad, I made a decision." And I said, "Well, what decision did you make?" He said, "I'm going to be a millionaire." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yep, I'm going to be a millionaire." I said, "Well, how do you know that?" And he said, "Well, I just got this book, and I should have grabbed it. But it was How to Turn $100 into $1 Million." I said, "Man, that is fantastic." I said, "Well, when you read that book, you need to let me know what it says. I'm interested." He said, "Dad, I read it in the bus. I already read it." I said, "You already read it?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, how do you turn $100 into $1 million?" And he said, 3 simple steps. I said, "Really?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Earn, save, and invest." And I'm like, dadgummit, I should have wrote that book. I said, "Well, tell me about the first step." I said, "How are you doing at earning?" He said, "Oh, Daddy, I'm pretty good at earning." He said, "I got a cow that has a calf every year." I said, "Yes, you do." He said, I've got a beehive. We got our bees." He said, "Little Biddle's bees." He said, "Last year we sold over 400 pounds of honey." I said, "Yep, you do. You make pretty good money on your bees." And they've got a pretty good bee business because I pay all the expenses. They get all the money. So I'm failing there. He said, "Dad," he said, "I do the lemonade stand with my sister." And he said, "You'd be surprised how good those little old ladies tip us." I said, "No, I've seen some of those tips." And he said, "Daddy," he said, "I work with Pops on the farm." He said, "You would be surprised how fast $2.25 an hour adds up." And I said, "Man, I'm sure I would be surprised." And I said, "Man, sounds like you got earning under control." And of course, now a job at $2.25 an hour is looking pretty good. But I said, you got earning under control. I said, "What's the next step?" He said, "The next step is to save." I said, "Talk to me about saving." Now, see, I know this is where he struggles. He said, "Well, Dad," he started looking at his boots. He said, "Well, Dad, I'm not very good at saving." I said, "Well, I know." I said, "But why not? What do you like to buy?" He said, "Well, I really like Legos." And dadgum, those Legos are tough. Those are expensive. And he does. He likes Legos. He's also a sucker for a good concession stand. Anywhere there's a ball game, he will zero in on a concession stand. And now our concession stand, it says no charge accounts. At the football game, there's a sign, no charge accounts, but they let Cruz have a tab. And that's a problem. And the other problem is Cruz is generous. Now, in our football games, you got the football field, you got the... Who's calling?
I think we're still back on.
Did it go away? We still there?
Sure.
It's all right. If you're not, I'll just talk to
You'll just talk to me.
But, so you got this other patch of grass, and that's where the kids that aren't in the game have their own game. And they'll be playing and rolling around the grass and get dirty and sweaty. And about halfway through the first quarter, one of his buddies will look up at him and say, "Oh, Cruz, I'm dying of thirst. Need a Coke." And he'll say, "Let's go put one on my tab." And so he will. One day he racked up a $40 tab at the football game. Now he has to take his own money. He's got to pay for his own tab. But I said, "Tell him, is it Tom Mark? Maybe that's a client wanting to hire me."
It probably is.
He probably is.
I'm sorry. They'll have to wait.
But so I said, "Well, what's the third step?" He said, "Well, the third step is to invest." And I said, "Well, how are you at investing?" He said, "Daddy, I don't even know what that means." And, a lot of people don't. We're probably finding out right now, a lot of people don't know what it means to steps 2 and 3, save and invest. And I said, well, it's kind of hard to explain he was 10 at the time, a 10-year-old, what investing is. But we were sitting right here in my office, and I had a copy of my book, Good Foreman, Bad Foreman. And I said, well, buddy, investing is where you take money and you put it into something, and that money works for you. And he said, well, how does it do that? And I had a copy of my book, Good Form, Bad Form, and I said, well, I invested in this book. I said, it took time and energy for me to write it, but I had to hire somebody to edit it, had to hire somebody to print it, had to hire somebody to do the page layout and all of this stuff. And it's been a pretty good return on my investment. You know, I sold, I don't know, 10, 20,000 copies of that, or 20,000 copies of that book. And so it's been a good return on my investment. And then he got this bright eye, and he said, well, Dad, I've got an idea. I said, well, what's your idea? He said, when you're writing your next book, and just hit that little button on the side. And he said, when you're writing your next book, and I said, well, I'm actually writing a book right now called Know This, Do That. And he said, how would you like an investor? And I said, well, let me talk to Mama, and let's figure out a plan that works for everybody. So I got Mama, and I said, you know, here's what we're wanting to do. And I went back to Cruz a week later, and I said, here's the deal, buddy. If you can earn and save $500, it's got to be new money. Can't be money you've already made. It's got to be new money. But if you can earn and save $500 in the next 90 days, I will let you invest in this book. He said, what do I get? I said, that's the right question. I said, you give me $500, I will give you 75 cents a copy for every book we sell for the first 5,000 copies. I print them in runs of 5,000 piece. He said, done. Now, what do you think happened to his work ethic when he started saving for something that he wanted? I mean, it skyrocketed. He took the rest of the honey down and sold it at the cafe. He immediately called Pops that night, and he said, Pops, let's start at 7 o'clock in the morning. I want to get in a 12-hour day, because he knew a 12-hour day at $2.25 an hour was over $25. He was excited about that. And but what do you think happened to his ability to save when he was saving for something that he wanted? I mean, it skyrocketed. He killed the Legos. He said, I don't need any more Legos. And then he went down to the football game, and he killed his tab. Next time they were playing in the end zone, kids are getting sweaty and covered in grass. Buddy comes up to him and said, oh, Cruz, I'm dying of thirst. I need a Coke. Cruz looks at him. You don't need a Coke. You need a job. He's done with it. He was absolutely done with it. He earned and saved that $500 in less than 90 days. Wrote me a check. He had a checking account. His first check he ever wrote was to me. That's the way it should be, shouldn't it? If kids are going to write checks, write them to their parents. But what's crazy is we sold 5,000 copies of that little book in the first 90 days. And so he got about a $3,275 check for his. It was too much. I should have rethought that. It's too sweet of a deal. But after we wrote him that check, he got out his checkbook, and he immediately wrote me a check for $1,000. He said, Dad, let's print 10,000 on the next run. Let's print 10,000 on the next run. And that's what we did. That's what we did. Guys, I don't want this to get too long, so I'm probably, man, I got so many I did not get to.
We'll have another night.
We will do this again. You might have a story that you want to share. We can we could try to phone you in. I can barely get this thing on, so maybe not. But thanks for hanging out with us. Take care of each other. My phone's dead.
It's getting there.
Oh, it's getting there. It's not dead yet. Okay, take care of each other. We'll see you.